very kind of you to come and listen to me on such a gorgeous day. I would not likely want to come and sit in a room with me for 2 hours. So I don't have 2 hours worth of material. I can go on that long, but I hope to give you an update on the university, some sort of context more broadly of both challenges and opportunities that the university is facing, as well as some things that are changing in Synod. I'll probably stop and pause along the way as we have bylaw changes out of the last convention. I'm very grateful my wife Jennifer's here. Thanks for being here, Jennifer. And of course, Jonathan, I'll talk about him a little bit more, but having a new campus pastor on campus and that transition and a new era for us as a university is very excited about what Jonathan brings. The Lord has blessed us richly. And Aaron Moldenauer is here as well. He is our Vice President for Mission and Church Relations. That's a new position that I've added. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But thank you for having me here. It's an honor to talk to you and to always tell the story of the good things that are happening at our university. I always need to start with mission and values. Perhaps you're familiar with our mission. Concordia University, Wisconsin is a Lutheran higher education community committed to helping students develop in mind, body, and spirit for service to Christ and the church and the world. And I'm sorry, Jonathan's going to have to hear a little bit of, he came through new faculty staff orientation last week and he heard some of my pitch around all of this. This is a long-standing mission for this university. It's been around for at least 2 decades, and it has served us well. You'll hear on our campus a lot of discussion around this focus on developing mind, body, and spirit. I like to start, though, with a conversation always that we are not the church. The distinctiveness between the church and the university is something that I think it warrants a little bit of attention. The church is the place where we go for God's gifts, for His mercy, His forgiveness of sins. And we as a university are an extension of that work. We are of the church and in the world, and we face into the world and continue the work that the church starts. And we are a blessing, hopefully, to the church. That is something we pray that we are. But I also don't want to always I think there can be a temptation to confuse some of the work between the entities. And so that's something we want to be careful about and keep those categories straight. I want our employees to be, and in fact all of our faculty need to be Christians. We are continually working to increase the number of Lutherans that we have on our faculty. And I want our faculty and staff to be connected intimately to their parishes. They're receiving God's mercy, His gifts, His forgiveness of sins, life and salvation there. I want them there saying their prayers, and I also want them bringing what they receive in church into their work at the university. We're at our best when that is happening. And of course, our focus is to be in the world, to be a welcoming place, but also to be staunchly committed to and faithful to the things that Christ asks of us as a university of the church. So our work is to walk in some challenging spaces sometimes. That can be complicated. But I don't want us to be afraid of that. I want us to be very faithful to what we're called to be as a Christian university, as a Lutheran university, but also always ready to bring that confession of faith into a world that desperately needs our graduates and the gifts and the skills that they bring. I try to spend time with our 4 values as a university as well. I think those are worth spending a little bit of time with, as they've become for me great touchstones for conversations around our work today and as we go forward. We have to be a Christ-centered university, and I think that flows so well from our mission, to be of the church in the world. If we are not faithful to Christ and what He calls us to be, why would we exist? There's no reason for our university if we are not able to faithfully confess the gospel, to speak into a world that needs to hear that our Lord Jesus is the one path to salvation. And so that needs to be part of all of our work. Sure, it's an academic thing. It should be something that students experience in theology classes, that's obvious. But it really should be an ethos that permeates all of our academic programming and our work broadly. Students who are athletes should see and experience that as well in their athletic experiences. it really should be just part of the comprehensive culture. And I would say in my year and a half of being on campus, it really is something that in so many ways does live across the university, and I'm grateful for that. It's not accidental, it is intentional. We're not perfect at it, but it needs to be something that we're talking about, living out, and holding one another accountable in terms of that. And I think the values kind of flow into one another. If we are Christ-centered, then truth and integrity should matter as well. Because of course our Lord Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. So we speak truthfully to one another, we confess that truth strongly, willingly, gladly in our work. And it also this idea of integrity, which is a word I like to drag back to its sort of origins in ancient Rome as a word that was used as Roman soldiers would hit one another's armor and test it before they'd go into battle. Does the armor have integrity? Does it all hold together and do what it's supposed to do? I love that because I think the truth of the gospel and our commitments as a Lutheran Christian university should be, that truth should be what holds us together, what makes us strong, which gives us integrity as an institution. And I think that's important on a lot of levels. It's what we're designed to be, it's how we're supposed to, and how we're called to live out our work. But it's also a distinctive thing and a rare thing today. How many universities are really committed to struggling and working through that difficult work of trying to be faithful that way? I'm good friends with the president of Wisconsin Lutheran College, Dan Johnson. I think their college and our university are the two examples in the state of Wisconsin of institutions that faithfully try to carry out that work. Never easy, we don't do it perfectly, but those commitments are real. That commitment to truth, that living out that integrity are defining hallmarks of all of our work, and they should be something that we're living out continually. Excellence. I like to frame excellence in opposition to the word elitism. We are not going to be Harvard, and we are not going to be even other schools that I think in our group we sometimes have affinity for, at Hillsdale or others. Those are fine things, and I don't mean to attack institutions that are more elite. But we are grounded in excellence. We are called to do great work, the best work we can, for the sake of the gospel and to provide a transformative education to our students. But it's also, I think, different from what we experience at more elite institutions, which have a desire to position themselves in a hierarchy and be perceived a certain way. I want us to do great work. I want our students to go out as they are called into and living out their vocations to be so well prepared for that, whether that's as Christians or as parents or as citizens or as workers or people in corporate life or butchers, bakers, candlestick makers. All of that is good. But that elitism means that I think that there are some that are left out of that and can be left out. And I like the idea that excellence is something that we share with all that the Lord brings to us. We want to be, in that sense, a very welcoming place, a place that is a home for people that want an outstanding transformative education that is grounded in the gospel, and that they can demonstrably talk about how that experience at the university, both their education and their being encouraged in their faith, those are things that have led them further down the path towards our Lord Jesus taking them home. And then service. We talk about this a lot, and it's tied to this commitment to vocation. A lot of universities and a lot of people, as they think about education, think about it as accumulating things. We talk about how many skills I've picked up, how many certificates I've picked up, what kind of credentials I've picked up, what kind of ability do I have to make more money. The idea of accumulation of knowledge and these other facets of life or career are what we tend to associate with the value of education. And there's some truth to that and there's some good to that. But I also like to talk about education, especially the education we provide, as a form of learning to lose things as well. And that's a very different kind of concept, to lose the self for the neighbor. That should be part of the calculus that our students come to understand, that a life of service for the neighbor is a great good that our Lord encourages, and that the church encourages as we live out in community together. And again, I think that's a differentiation for our university. And it's something that I believe comes pretty naturally, in our work as an institution. So, I also think it's helpful, it's fine to stop for questions along the way as I'm working through slides. So, that's sort of a sense of mission and who we are and how I like to talk about this. Anything anyone wants to ask about with that? All right. I also thought I'd bring some numbers so you have some sense of where we are statistically. I'll need to unpack the numbers a little bit, but this gives you a sense of where we were last year. These are numbers we reported to the Synod, and some fluctuations this year, but we don't report yet for this current year. I broke them out according to the two campuses, and one of the things I'd ask you to understand for the total numbers, that includes every warm body that is enrolled in some sort of credentialed program. It includes, for example, high school students that are taking dual credit courses. So the numbers are inflated, and so when and I don't mean that as trying to hide things or whatever, it's just these are the numbers we end up reporting. So that's, and we'd love to have the highest number possible. And everyone who wants to hear numbers wants to hear the highest numbers possible. And they're great, and there is a lot of strength in our numbers, but they may be, in terms of, especially the economic implications of the numbers, not quite what it looks like there. So we can unpack that a bit. Concordia, Wisconsin sits a little over 6,000 students, 47 pre-sem students last year. I'm not sure what it is this year. Do you know, Aaron?
Comparable.
50-ish, right? I think that's the number we're working at there. And I believe the largest church work program and pre-seminary program in our synodical school system, which I'm proud of and committed to strengthening. And that's one of the things we need to continue. We can talk about it today, and it's certainly a significant focus of our work going forward. Lutheran teacher education, 109 students. Director of Christian ministry, 48 students. And total church work students last year, 215. This year, I think we graduated a smaller number. I'd have to go back and look. It will be a slightly smaller number for next year. Between COVID, presidential search, some other things, some of our numbers have dipped. But this year, as we've recruited, we've seen a good rebound in that. So grateful for that, and we continue to press forward. At Ann Arbor, over 1,300 students total, 12 pre-sem, 25 Lutheran teacher, and a total of about 46. So that's statistically where we sit. Any questions about that? And again, strong numbers.
How many are on campus?
Let's see. Well, if we break down enrollment, I think I've got a slide that addresses this later. For example, for us at Concordia, Wisconsin, we have 1,000 international students currently. Most of those do not live on campus. Most of them are in our computer science graduate program, and they live in Chicago and come up 2 days a week and then go back home. So that's an example of the complexity of the kind of segmented enrollment we have. I believe traditional undergrad is about 2,300-ish.
Something like that. I went to seminary, so I didn't have to know numbers.
Yes. But I think traditional undergrad is about 2,300 and about, I want to say, I don't remember how many are in the dorms this year. We still have capacity in our dorms at Mequon. On the Ann Arbor campus, it's about 1,000 traditional undergrads and 600 living in the dorms. The dorms are maxed out or close to maxed out there.
And you still have like the off-site campuses in Appleton and Green Bay?
We do not have those anymore. No, those have been,
okay.
Yeah, it's one of the shifting models of higher education today that everything that is not a traditional undergraduate program on campus has really moved online.
Okay.
And that model was very successful for our university for a long time. It was a strength of ours. I think we were very innovative in that work, and the world changed. So we're going in some very different directions with that, and going forward, that's going to be something we need to continue to think about. And how do we enhance our capabilities with them.
And that
Please.
shift about 4 or 5 years ago, I think, is when we started closing the centers down because everybody was going on.
Yeah. That makes
And I
sense.
think they formally closed right before I started.
It was gradual. I mean,
Yeah, it was a gradual process,
consolidating, right.
Yeah, so our models of delivery and just thinking about not only finances, but what's the best way to deliver an education, there is some evolution around all of that taking place. Please.
Just out of curiosity, what was the total enrollment in Concordia Net 1 in 2022?
20, I don't know off the top of my head. I think similar, although I'd say this, one of the things we've experienced, and it's led to some of our financial challenges, we're down about 17.5% with enrollment over the last 5 years. So there's been kind of a gradual movement downward. I think it's important to frame that as we talk about it with the headwinds that all of higher education is facing. There's certainly some distinctive issues that are tied to our campus, yes, but there's also just quite a bit that's tied to, well, what Cardinal Stritch has struggled with and led to their closure. Perhaps you've heard about Northland. There's Marquette has announced some significant changes financially that they're going to live out over the next several years. Alverno is in the middle of some really significant financial challenges. We're not alone in seeing that. I also want to communicate those strengths. I think we've got a bit of a floor under those enrollment dips, and I'm feeling pretty good about where we are. Again, we've tried to create different segments of enrollment to try to manage this going forward, or think about it going forward, so that we have traditional undergrad, and we're thinking about how are we going to best serve those students. Nested inside of that is church work. How do we prioritize that? How do our graduate online programs continue to hopefully grow and be something that can grow? If we can't easily grow traditional undergrad because there are fewer and fewer 18-year-olds, how do we grow graduate? How do we grow degree completion and help people who have some college credits get a credential? And then, how do we serve international? And thinking through those segments and build a new model going forward that allows us to do our best work, yes, faithful to our mission, and also fiscally be in a position of strength. You're going to ask something, please.
I think you kind of answered it.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, more specifically, what do you see as the reasons for that decline? You hinted at one of the changing demographics, right?
Yeah, everyone who's on our campus is probably a little tired of hearing me talk about a demographic cliff. It's a real thing, and as I'm not a demographer, but I believe that if we can get to around 2030, not if, we will get to 2030 as an institution, God willing. That's the point. That's sort of a turning point when some of the demographers are saying it will be an easier path. It's these next 5 years that are really challenging. I think it's fair to say too, we've had some challenges inside our own church body, and I'll talk about those a little bit too. The presidential search was a complicated situation. I think there were moments where, and probably more than moments, where unfortunately we created opportunities for people to have questions about our university and its relationship to the church. I hope as you listen to me today, one of the things you hear is our deep and abiding commitment to make sure we are the church's university, and that is an ongoing relationship that just needs to be prioritized, valued, nurtured, and we're doing everything we can to enhance that. So we are, in my perspective, the strongest university of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Academically, financially, just in terms of the quality of our faculty and staff. That needs to change, and it needs to change that we build a wider gap between ourselves and the other institutions. They do good work too, but I want to move us ahead and further down. Okay? So those are the story by the numbers. You can go to our webpage and see our strategic plan in the coming days. That is there right now, but this is what we will be living out for the next 4 years. It's entitled Together We Will. and really provides a broad framework in terms of guiding projects that hopefully strengthen us as a university going forward. So there are 4 themes. The first one's living our mission. I want that to be front and center as something that we are continually talking to one another about as a university, and ensuring that we are doing everything we can to promote mission. So the initiatives that are under that theme, some of them are fulfilled by people in this room. One of them was bringing a vice president for mission and identity to the campus. We were the only institution that did not, in the system, that did not have that position in place. And I am so grateful for Aaron's willingness to take on that role. In that role, he's collaborating with our advancement team around church relations. There's collaboration with our enrollment team around thinking around how can we be best positioned to recruit church work students. There's also this opportunity to turn inward, to enhance. You know, we have a program for bringing faculty and staff on board and guiding them around Lutheran doctrine and practice. I want to see it enhanced. I want it to be the best program in Synod, and Aaron's the perfect individual to help us do that. So we're on the front lines of, and early in that process. Jonathan's work as well in the chapel, that's also something that, you know, I want to be careful as I talk about what we've done in the past. There's a lot of strength. You know, when I walk into our chapel daily, I am so grateful for what we've inherited, and what we've lived out as a university. Much good. I also think there's just some opportunity to think through some things differently. I think in the future you're going to see that we're inviting district pastors to come in and preach regularly. You know, we're inviting, I don't know if I have this on another slide, but we are in conversations, and we're pretty far down the road with the South Wisconsin District to bring the district headquarters to campus. So hopefully those are just all examples of there is intentionality around mission, and the initiatives in the strategic plan all have to be grounded and really helping us develop a return on investment when it comes to mission. We want to be asking that question: how is this helping us believe, teach, and confess what we are committed to as a Lutheran university? Second theme, create transformative student experiences. Our work with students is critical, central to what we do on a daily basis. So the initiatives under this part of the plan are really focused on delivering a high-quality education to our students. So one of the initiatives, for example, is reconsidering or restructuring our core curriculum. We'll always be teaching the theology courses that we agreed to as part of our relationship with Synod, so that will remain central. But can we have a distinctive core that we can go out to students and say, this is a strong liberal arts foundation for our students, that integrates the Christian faith into a base of knowledge and understanding of the world that prepares you to go out into the world. Another initiative is about a promise statement. You'll sometimes hear a university develop a promise statement as a way of approaching families and saying, here's our commitment to you. It can be about affordability. It can be about faith commitments. In our case, it would be about both of those things. It can be about the quality of education. It can be about promising that students will have experiences with what we might call high-impact practices. That could be saying, and we're working on this, it's sort of in a development stage right now, that we would want all traditional undergraduates to graduate with at least 2 of a set of, or a list of high-impact practices that would include a mentoring experience that's ongoing, an internship, hopefully a paid internship, study abroad or study away at another university. We want to complement what happens in a classroom with educational experiences that connect them with alumni, that get them down a pathway with their career, that just helps them to see the world more broadly and as well as experience it deeply. Third theme, I wouldn't be a university president today if I didn't talk about money. Securing resources for mission is also a critical part of our future. It's a frustrating thing sometimes to talk about finances in higher ed because our financial models in higher ed are not really carried out or lived out in a way where we make money off of traditional undergrad students. And I think that probably frustrates most families. I know it frustrates families. We are not like a more elite institution. We're seeing now some price tags for elite institutions going to $100,000 a year. That is not us. Affordability is a central focus for us, and what we deliver as a university is very expensive to deliver. It is so people-centric that just means it's continually expensive. Technology can be a helpful tool for mitigating some of that, but even online education, to do it very well, is a very expensive proposition. When it comes to training, when it comes to developing courses, when it comes to having the right faculty-student ratios, it just costs a lot of money to do it the right way. So we need to be thinking about, how do we have a campaign in the future? How do we have strategic budgeting that allows us to look into the future every 4 years, and are we appropriately living within the resources that the Lord provides to us? We're looking, and I'll get into finances in a little bit, because of course, it's no secret, we and others have challenges with that. I and my team have tried to bring in some different ways of looking at the finances than perhaps we've looked at before. In the past, I think it's been very tempting for us, for most institutions, to kind of have an umbrella of funds that come in, that are generated, whether that's through our advancement team or through tuition, etc. And we have a big pile of money and we can move it where we need to across the year. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think we're trying to bring more targeted and focused understandings of how we might be strategic with our resources. So for example, can we say the revenue from our dorms and from students essentially buying room and board from us, that money in isolation is used to cover athletics. And let's keep that kind of as a narrow focus. And can we live within our means that way and understand our budgeting that way? That's new for us. And those kinds of more tight parameters or metrics underneath the large umbrella of finance have led to us understanding we want to be careful with the resources we have. And it's led to some of the conversations and challenges as we work towards a new future within Ankerberg. The other thing I should say about securing resources, we have a very strong advancement team. It's the strongest advancement team that I've ever been blessed to work with as a university faculty member or administrator. These are very dedicated people who do a fine job of going out and building relationships and networks across not only the church, but also in the world. We have a new vice president for advancement who's joining us. We will continue to be completely focused on doubling down on our partnership with the church, so that will remain a priority. And she also brings some capacity to help us start talking to healthcare networks, for example, and other groups, build friendships and relationships that maybe have been a little harder for us to connect to. And I'm hoping we can widen that opportunity in the future. Then a fourth theme. And this is probably the more complicated one. Really, as I started my work and had about 30 listening sessions across both campuses, one of the themes that came out was some I'd say discomfort around the partnership between the two campuses. And I think it's never been completely solved across the 10 years of the relationship between the two campuses. And that led us to say, all right, one of the themes of the strategic plan needs to be, how do we closely examine and struggle with what's happening across the two campuses, and how do we make this work better? Some of it's culture, some of it's finance, some of it is just how we're structured, but we came together and it hasn't worked as fruitfully as we would like. So how can we do that? Now, as we started pursuing the initiatives under that theme, that has also led to some of the complexity that I'll talk about in a few minutes. But I'd also say, and I think it's important for people to hear, as complicated, as sometimes ugly, the fallout has been of these conversations, they are following what the strategic plan's asking us to do, which is to figure out how to get this right, and how to do it in a way that this university is strong and endures and is able to be a blessing to the church and the world for generations to come. It may have gone, it's a little more complicated than I think we first thought when we crafted this theme, but it's doing what we needed to do.
Is there a
Yeah.
reason that CUAA feels distrust towards the commitment?
Now we're going to go past noon.
Thanks, Joe.
Well, they seem to immediately go from, we're all together, to, you hate us and are going to kill us.
Yeah.
And there was no middle ground, there was no opportunity for discussion, and no waiting to find out.
Yeah. I think there's two things. You're touching on two things that are really central to the conversation of the partnership. One is culture, and one is the speed with which we're trying to make some changes.
Yeah.
I'll get into the speed a little bit later when we do the dive into the finances.
Sure.
If you could hold off on that. I'll start with and I'm just going to shoot straight because I just need to speak candidly. I think there was a desire as the two universities came together, and I always want to frame it as generosity and grace.
Mm-hmm.
The university saw a need in a sister institution, and please understand that 10 years ago, Concordia, Wisconsin was probably around $8 to $10 million in the black annually. We were doing very well financially. It was a different world financially for the university. Those blessings, or the blessings of that financial position, allowed the university to say, we can step out in generosity to support Ann Arbor in this time of need. So I'd say that. Second thing I'd say about it is, I think for a lot of reasons it was a tender moment, and we treated it more as a partnership as opposed to an acquisition. And it probably should have been treated more as an acquisition. And I think a lot of that was because of the emotions and I think that's just a fair way to put it. But that led us to, I think, create and live out over time a perception that these are two equal campuses.
They're not.
And they're not. You know, if we do the dive on the numbers, Ann Arbor represents about 20% of the university's revenue. 80% of the strength of this university is the mothership at Concordia, Wisconsin. And as we've tried to live out essentially a culture of trying to, I guess, sustain this idea of two equal campuses, it's led to that, I think, the sensitivity and the difficulty and the hurt in this, that we're now pitting two equal places against one another and trying to do harm to one to save the other. And some of that's not been helpful either. Concordia, Wisconsin has challenges, and we are working diligently, tirelessly to address those. We're in a very strong position, especially relative to other higher educational institutions in the state.
Sure.
And we have to address the things that are happening in Ann Arbor. They're very different things. So I'd start there. I think it's, and the feeling, again, I heard this in my listening sessions. One campus saying, why is that campus getting X when I need Y? We have struggled with that. And, you know, some of the deeper challenges are financially. This was supposed to be a partnership that within 4 years, Ann Arbor was supposed to be self-sustaining financially. That never happened. And that was supposed to be able to happen because of the centers. That center model, that way of extending education through centers was something we saw success here. We thought we could bring that to Michigan and replicate it. Well, as we just mentioned, that model didn't work here, or it worked for a while and then stopped working, and it never worked in Michigan. So, and I'll also say this, we didn't come out and talk about these financial challenges. Mm-hmm. And we should have found ways to do that. One of the things that's difficult for me, and I want to be very careful, there's a lot of reasons why that didn't happen, but if we were expecting within 4 years to be in the black in Ann Arbor, we have essentially annually lost about $5 million at Ann Arbor over 10 years, about 16.5% of operational costs. And that financial aspect of the model, that financial model's just never worked. And that's part of what led us to this point of we have to do some things different. Please.
I'm just curious,
Yeah.
was part of the initial thinking that you could share resources too, especially human resources?
And we do.
Has that happened?
We do. I think I have tried in my tenure to pull more of the control and more of the structural leadership back to our campus. I mean, I think the intent was, let's maximize efficiencies. That led to, oh, it's hard for me on an Ann Arbor campus to meet with an advisor. So, well, let's hire an advisor over there. I would say we struggled to really have an accounting system and a financial model where we really understood how we could do this in a way that was sustainable into the future. The pivoting then from let's have centers where we could generate revenue, what it moved to was a more athletics-based model for recruitment. So at Ann Arbor, that's what ended up happening there.
And didn't that already fail at Selma?
I think it's been tried at a lot of places. There are institutions in the country where it's worked. We're at and I can talk about why it doesn't work here, but we essentially built out, we did in Ann Arbor what we needed to do to try and generate revenue. The challenge has been two things. I mean, one of the things that's, and we'll get into it in the future slides, is that there is a ceiling on the amount of money we can generate through dorms. So we call that auxiliary revenue, room and board, right? You heard me earlier say what we'd like to do is live in a space where we use that money from room and board to pay for athletics. Well, we have so many athletes at Ann Arbor. I believe it's close to 60% of our traditional undergrads there are participating in athletics. And athletics are a very expensive enterprise. What we are finding now is that in the last accounting and analysis of our accounting, we're spending in Ann Arbor about 25% of tuition dollars to pay for athletics. So the money we'd spend on athletics, that box of money that we would get from auxiliary revenue, we're taking 25% of the money from the box of tuition and putting it in there, which of course starves academics, which is our primary purpose. And it's those kinds of realities that I'd point to when I say with the model, we're really struggling. We need to be in a place where we have athletics that work, academics that are fully funded the way they need to be, and understand that we can't build dorms tomorrow. To have new dorms, we would probably need at the Ann Arbor campus at least 1,200 students living on campus, paying for room and board to be in a strong, reasonable financial position. We have half of that right now. And those dorms that we have are the original dorms that probably need to be replaced. And it would probably cost $100 million to build the extra 600 beds that we would need. So potentially, if we're replacing the old dorms, building new dorms, we're looking at a couple of $100 million worth of capital projects, and we don't have that money. So it's trying to find a way to live within our means. We're ready to continue. Next slide. This is more just to let you know, and hopefully as a kind of assurance, that there are, besides a strategic plan, a number of initiatives at work to help us do our best work moving forward. Even in the summer, the university is a busy place, and there's a lot going on that helps us think through how to be our best professional selves as a university. So we're undergoing campus master planning on both campuses. With the growth architectural firm. They've been very helpful and trying to really think through what are the issues we have in terms of deferred maintenance on both campuses, as well as what are the possibilities and the needs as we go forward as a university. So wonderful things, including even some enhancements for the chapel, etc. Looking forward to having Aaron and Jonathan speak into that and think through that going forward. We're doing strategic enrollment planning. It's not that we haven't done this in the past, but it's as we manage and curate our list of programs as a university, I think it's fair to say we had some programmatic bloat across the university. We had, I think over 200 programs as I walked in the door. We probably should be closer to about 100. Many of those programs, it was dribs and drabs, 2 students in it, no one had been in it for 5 years, whatever. So a lot of that is simply let's clean up the books. But some of it is also how do we curate an academic program for the university that, while yes, prioritizing church work programs, for example, also says, here's our best work. We're not going to do all things for all people. We're going to focus on these things that we do in an excellent way at scale. Strategic budgeting, I mentioned that before. I'm hoping that in the coming days we can have a capacity to be thinking continually 4 years ahead of ourselves. And some of that is prognostication and it's imperfect, but I think there's also a value to not just living in the moment with our finances, but trying to understand as best we can how we can be good stewards of the resources that we have. We're also hoping probably next year to start some of the quiet work around planning for a campaign of some sort for the university. There are several building projects that need attention. For example, nursing. We could probably serve twice as many nursing students as we currently do if we had more space. And that's just one of our fantastic programs. I have a brother-in-law who works at Fredericton Children's Hospital in the Medical College, and even he talks about and celebrates our nursing graduates as great, excellent colleagues, and they are. And that's just one example of there's opportunity for us if we can find resources to expand our space and place. I thought I'd spend a little bit of time with this. Depending on how far in the weeds you want to go around the last convention, perhaps you've all recovered from that at this point. Give yourself a year and it kind of fades a little bit. The 704, and I think now some of it's 705 bylaw changes around governance for the universities are actually quite extensive. And we have quite a bit of work. Aaron's plate is full with a different kind of relationship that the bylaws frame out between Synod and the universities in terms of, especially the partnership with CUS. Concordia University System has, I think just a more formal kind of visitation relationship with the universities, which I do support. I want to come out and say that. I think transparency and conversation and having CUS people on campus, and now, for example, this summer having our regents go to St. Louis for board training. Those are really different kinds of intentionality around the partnership than perhaps we've lived out in the past. It's expensive, yes, it's not free, none of that is free. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of work, but I think there is great opportunity there to hopefully, if there are questions, concerns, conflicts, that they can be addressed at lower levels, where the temperature is lower, and we have opportunity to not get to these more dramatic kinds of conflicts that we have sometimes seen. I'm grateful for Mark Braden and his work with the CUS board. They've just been great partners for us. And I think that will simply continue as we go forward. There will be a new Concordia University System president elected, I think this week. Dean Wenthy's retiring. I'm grateful for what the bylaws ask. And it's also going to bring a lot of work to us. So we have a visitation, an informal visitation in June, first week in June, and it's kind of all hands on deck for leadership at the university and an opportunity for us to show our best work on the Wisconsin campus. So a lot of good there and a lot of new, different, and there are these new Lutheran identity standards, mission outcome standards, they're called the LEMOs. Those are really drivers for framing the relationship between the universities and the synod, and will be evaluated according to those. And again, I think that level of clarity and specifics and intentionality is good. Am I missing anything with that, Aaron? At a high level, that's okay. All right. So, all good. It's alphabet soup under that, DOE, HLC, other accreditation groups. Sometimes this is a tender conversation, but it's one of the things we need to be intentional about. In order for our students to receive financial aid, we've got to function in the left-hand kingdom area in ways that are sometimes complicated. So the DOE, the Department of Education, we need to be aware of the kinds of requirements that they have for the university and think through both how are we faithful to our confession, as well as how are we wisely interacting with the state. So as we make programmatic changes, etc., we're just always thinking about managing those relationships. The Higher Learning Commission, HLC, that is our regional accreditor. In a sense, they are a representative of the government. They do accreditation visits and tend to be sort of a higher level form of allowing us to demonstrate our best work to other peer institutions. So it's sort of a collaborative network of similar private universities and public universities that come together under the umbrella of HLC. And then we also have other accreditation groups. So for example, physician's assistant or occupational therapy. Those groups, in order to maintain licensure or education programs, we have to be just aware of the requirements that are asked of us in those programs and make sure that we are finding our way to move forward, again, in a way where we are fully in alignment with what we confess as a church, but also able to meet those professional requirements. I think sometimes people feel that has to be a challenging space. It's not easy, but I also think it's just something that is part of our work today as a university. I'm not afraid of it. It's something that we do, I think, rather well. And we're trying to maintain that walk that line or maintain that balance in both of those spheres. And one of the other areas that we'll be working on, together, as we go forward is governance. We've got some governance issues with the Board of Regents and the Foundation Board that we are aware of, that we want to do some restructuring and some thinking through. As part of the 704-705 bylaw implementation, we are actually required to submit all of our governance documents to the CCM for evaluation. They are in process of reviewing all of that now. We'll receive a report back about where we're in alignment, out of alignment with Synod bylaws, and then we'll do some work. So I think all of the universities, I'll speak for my fellow presidents, we are expecting that there'll be some things we need to tweak, or more than tweak, in some areas. So again, I bring that out as hopefully that is an assuring or reassuring kind of demonstration of the collaboration between church as synod, church locally, and the university. Questions about these things? Please.
Is there any conflict?
Yeah.
Forgive my ignorance.
No,
as far as the accreditation process and what we would get in funding away from the federal government or state government or anything like that. Are there any mandates that are placed on the university as to what you have to teach, such as DEI?
That's a great question, and that's one that comes up a lot. There is space for us to demonstrate that we can serve all students well. I think that's a commitment we broadly have to be able to say that we do, while also being able to speak into that we have to be fully faithful to the governance of the church. So that's that line we end up having to walk. So, but there aren't mandates, and again, I think the devil's in the details. How is a social work course taught can be a little complicated. I think that's a fair thing for me to say, or certain education courses or in certain healthcare programs. We need to be very intentional around that. And that will be some of Aaron's work, to be working with faculty as they're doing accreditation documents for different groups, as well as they're doing the training of how do we, let's be wise as servants around this, right? We want that accreditation. We want to have the appropriate professional partnerships. So we're going to talk about how we can serve diverse students, but it has to be in a way that is fully in alignment with us and our commitments as a Lutheran university. So I'm grateful for Aaron's thinking through that with groups. And yeah, speaking to that, please.
So I'll just say, the way I'm threading the needle or walking the line or whatever it is that because we're Lutherans, regardless of where a person comes from or who they are, we see them as someone whose God has created in his image to be his child, whom God loves. We see someone for whom Christ died on the cross and said this person is worth me dying for. And when we see them in that light, we're going to value them and see how we can reach out and love to serve them. Now, that's not using the language of DEI. I think it's trending towards what in the ideal world is going to be the goal of either one, and that's to treat everybody with fairness and love and respect.
Has the Office of Diversity, it's closed, right? You had a position where a person was serving, you could never contact them, but...
I can't speak to that last point. We have an Office of Multiculturalism. Was it called something else?
Office of Multicultural Engagement.
Multicultural Engagement, right.
Greg Schultz's.
Yeah, we've pulled way back on all of those things. So, and for example, there used to be an ability to have reporting around microaggressions and things like that. We've walked back from that to there is one complaint form for the university for any issue that would need to be addressed, which we're actually required to do by our accreditors.
Sure.
If someone has formal complaints about a wide range of issues, that has to be something they can do easily. But what we've tried to do is say, maybe we don't need that microaggression stuff. Let's handle this in a different way and be appropriately careful about that. So all of those issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're in process of walking back. We have an interim vice president for student success. I've changed that position. I think she's interested in the position full time, and I'm talking to her about how we could move to that direction. She's a very faithful LCMS member and very gifted. All of that needs to be watched and asked about, and she's great about saying, as my administration has inherited a lot of things, some are great, some we have questions about, etc. All of that is being evaluated, or how is it consistent or not consistent with who we are.
So more specifically, does an Office of Multicultural Engagement exist on the university right now?
Not on the, well, I need to be careful about this. There is a position at Ann Arbor that is still carrying out some of that work. That's under review for change. On our campus, it's the multicultural engagement. There isn't a position for that right now, is there? Is there? Walter's doing that, that's right. Yeah, but it's the programming around that. It tends to play out in two ways. One is a Black student union and a Hispanic student union. Both groups I'm meeting with, and I'll say this today, I haven't seen any activity around that I'm uncomfortable with. So we're trying to very carefully, globally make sure that we're doing what we need to do as a Lutheran university to be faithful. And we also have to be, I think, also vigilant about the kind of language I want it to be. I want us to be a place that welcomes people and is respectful to them from a Christian perspective. Now that's different from affirming. I'm not interested in affirming everything that people bring to the university. And as we're talking about it at a high level in leadership, that's where we want to be. We do not affirm everything. We want some of our students who are bringing positions from the world to be uncomfortable. Okay? That is okay. More than okay. And I think there's also something that's useful about some of our Christian students and some of our Lutheran students meeting people that don't see the world fully the way they see it. And a little bit of tension there is okay as they strengthen their ability to go out into a world that is not always welcoming to the Christian perspective or the Christian tradition. So those are ways we're thinking about it and talking about it. Yeah.
As a for instance, relatively soon, Amazon Prime has a show called the Campus Tour, I think.
Yes.
They just filmed it. One of the students featured in there is a Latino student. She talks on there, they've got pictures that she went through Martin Luther Greendale, I believe, for high school and was baptized as a Lutheran there. And was studying to be a Lutheran school teacher. And I mean, she has a scene and talks about how helpful the Latino Student Union has been for her just to meet with friends. There are pictures of them playing a game that I don't recognize, some sort of board game, card game, and sharing her favorite treats, which I also, I don't know, they look good to me. I'm curious to try them as well. So it's not, those groups are not dividing the world into oppressors and oppressed and, you know, running down that line. They are for students to come together with and share their culture with those who have the same, and an opportunity to share that culture more broadly across the university.
And I have no objections to that, it's just can't cross the line into
Agreed. And I always want to be careful with the accusations that have come before I was on campus. I can speak to what I know since I started on January 9th a year ago. I would say there are labels on areas of the institution that we're working on changing there, and broadly, I continue to see people that are trying to be faithfully Christian and not trying to engage and advocate for things that we shouldn't be advocating for. Now, when it comes our way, we tackle it. I mean, there's the Holy incident. I can talk about that in a few minutes, and some other things that do get away from us. And even in that incident, it was more about how we talked about it and framed it than what was actually going on the ground. I don't like how that played out, and we are making changes as a result of it. But sometimes I think that's the challenge, is that we haven't always framed or communicated well. What's happening, the actual activity is often very much in alignment with who we are as a Lutheran university. Is that a fair way of putting it, Aaron?
Yes.
But we need to find better ways to talk about it. And I'll mention some more specific examples in a couple of minutes. Just a quick couple of highlights here. The executive team, I'm surrounded by just fabulous professionals. Aaron's certainly one of them, but my team is amazing. All but two are Missouri Synod Lutherans, and they care about mission, they care about our students, and they want this university to be the strongest place possible. And so I'm blessed by the support that they provide, and we're in good hands in terms of leadership at the university. Just at this point, CUW has again been named a top 10 military-friendly school, ranked #1 among private colleges offering doctorate degrees, and CUW is #1 for military spouses. If any of you have served, thank you for your service. I think this is just a neat thing to pull out and say, you know, we're very much an institution that wants to be military-friendly. That's a good thing for us. I've already welcomed Jonathan. You're just going to get welcomed all the time. Something you might be interested in going forward is the Concordia Christian Leadership Series breakfast. When I came in, I changed it from simply a leadership breakfast back to what I think it was earlier, an earlier iteration of it as a Christian leadership breakfast. And June 6th, John McHugh from Quick Trip, I believe he's an active member of the Wisconsin Synod, is speaking and talking about how faith informs his work at Quick Trip. So I think it's going to be a really great day. So join us if you're able. So, this is the fun one to talk about, right? Let's talk about Concordia, Wisconsin, and Ann Arbor, and some of the challenges we've had over the past few months, and it will build on things we've talked about. $9 million structural deficit for last year. That's a number that I need you to hear. In our past habits and practices had been to not really talk about that, and here's why. We have been a very successful university, as I mentioned before, with an advancement team that does great work. the advancement team's efforts and the growth of our endowments over time have covered up that structural deficit. And by structural deficit, I mean operational deficit that rolls over from year to year. Too many people, too many offices, too many pencils being bought, whatever. It's those kinds of costs year over year that have been a challenge. It is a challenge that's across both campuses too. It's not fair to say one campus has been everything's easy street and the other's a problem. That's just not fair. Both campuses have different versions of financial challenges that we're working to address and the board has asked me to take on. Sort of that broad number, I threw this out before, we've seen a 17.5% decline in enrollment over the past 5 years at CUW, and the financial model really doesn't work at Ann Arbor. Again, I would tie that mostly to the auxiliary revenue issue. If I had new dorms tomorrow, paid for, filled, 200 students buying room and board, it's probably a different kind of conversation. At the same time, there is also significant deferred maintenance on that campus that has just never been addressed. If you're ever on that campus, it's a lovely place in so many ways, and the field house is in need of significant work. Probably it's at the end of its life. So that's a $40 million investment that would need to be made. The academic facilities are adequate-ish. We've put in about $90 million in that campus over 10 years. We procured a building about 1.5 miles north of campus, the old Ave Maria Law School, if you're familiar with Ann Arbor, transformed that into a health sciences facility. That's been a great investment, a great addition to the campus, but the financial modeling doesn't work, especially with the athletics the way it is. Yes, please.
Your $9 million structural deficit, how much of that's Ann Arbor?
It's varied a bit year to year. Last year it was about $5 million for Ann Arbor, $4 million for Wisconsin. Wisconsin's issue is essentially, I don't want to say simple, because it's been a really difficult challenge to carry out a reduction in force this spring, which we have, and which was in the news. It's really, we had to adjust the staffing, faculty and staff, to meet the number of students we had. And one of the things that happened that perhaps you're aware of throughout COVID, the federal government was incredibly generous with providing financing and resources to sort of cover universities broadly, help sustain them. As we came out of COVID, that money went away, and that's exposing some of the financial challenges that universities are facing. We were relying on some of that COVID money. And I want to talk about strength because, again, we are a relatively strong institution. And when you look at and we've heard it in the conflict and some of the challenges as it's played out in social media, when you go to an audit, the audit looks really great. And it does. And our Department of Education financial analysis score is what it's supposed to be. That's very different from how cash flow works for a university. I could go into the endowment and take a little more money out. Yes, that is true. But that also means that the endowment doesn't grow over time, or its ability to grow over time is impaired. And that doesn't do us any good. Our endowment is probably about half of what it ought to be for a university our size. I'm not complaining about it. It's actually pretty great for us. And that means to go in and take another $2 million annually to address operational shortfalls, I'm not prepared to do that, and I have asked the board to not authorize that. I'll take responsibility for that. I do not think that is wise. Yes, please.
You have mentioned a couple of times now that the relationship between athletics expenses and funding that through
auxiliary,
dormitory, whatever. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship of athletics and recruiting how they might help finances? Or is there a possibility that there really is not a reasonable place for athletics in our Concordias?
You're rolling
All right.
the tape.
Well, athletics is,
Yeah.
it's a great question. It is a great question. I think one of the places I want to start and end in that conversation is what's our core work should be. What are we called to do? And we are called to be this Lutheran Christ-centered educational institution. And that's, if we're not doing that well, why do we exist? So, I think athletics, I was a college athlete. I played tennis. I had great experiences as part of that. It can and should be a complementary part of a student's educational growth experience. It can be a wonderful place to be mentored, to see Christian values played out. All of that is good. I think it's finding the model. How much of it? And what's that sweet spot on the continuum? And some of that is a financial consideration. Some of that is a cultural consideration. And I think institutions struggle with that. And in a time of declining enrollment for traditional undergrads, it has been very tempting for many institutions to say, we can buy ourselves some breathing room by bringing in students who are athletes. So we add sports and add coaches and facilities and from soup to nuts. It's a strategy that it's not just something that the Concordias are struggling with. So I think it's something each individual university in campus needs to struggle with and be very intentional about how this fits in as part of our work without taking over. I'll start there. Please.
So if I'm understanding correctly,
Yeah.
you're saying that it does help with recruitment.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, yeah. And in a sense, I think it's fair to say Concordia Ann Arbor has grown its enrollment significantly because of its reliance on athletics. And the more they have grown, the more they've spent. And so what has, in a sense, saved them is now doing significant harm to them. And I don't know how to say that in a politically correct way. It's for that campus. It's when 25% of tuition dollars, which should be for teaching and learning, are going to athletics, I can't stand in front of people and say I'm comfortable with that. Athletics then is starving academics, and we can go to lots of places to justify it and whatever. I get it, but I keep coming back to I want a different model, and I'm responsible for it, and I wanted to see us do this in a different way. So,
Thank you.
does that answer it?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, we've spent about $90 million on Ann Arbor over time. And there was one year where we essentially it was only about a $500,000 deficit at the Ann Arbor campus that was tied to the sale of some property. So that was that revenue offset. But it's generally been, we've been in a position, as I mentioned before, where we've been losing about $5 million a year. We are in a place, and I would say this, and I think it's part of the social media narrative, there are some graduate programs in Ann Arbor that are starting to generate some more revenue. And that's a blessing and that's a good thing. I do not see that we are anywhere near a point where we're going to be operationally close to breaking even. And when you couple that with the significant capital needs for that campus, whether that's dorm renovation, field house, etc., just fixing buildings and space in place, I think we can't continue to do what we've been doing. And that's been my conversation with the Board of Regents. Can we have the space and an opportunity to construct a different model that allows us to, yes, be physically present in Michigan, to do great work there, to do church work, to find our strongest programs and move forward, but perhaps not have all of the sports, perhaps just manage that model differently. And I think that's the heart of a lot of the conflict that we're experiencing today. There's a strong desire in Michigan to say we can't touch any of it. And I think we need to make some rather significant changes to the financial model. We've certainly had PR challenges around this issue. And it saddens me how this has played out in the public sphere. I think people of goodwill are going to argue and have differing opinions about the future of this campus, but I do want to keep coming back to Ann Arbor is 20% of our operations, and I think there is much good that we can do there, but to have the Wisconsin campus at risk and continually funding at the level we are funding the Ann Arbor campus is something that is not sustainable over time. And we talk about the speed with which we've had to act, and I think that's probably one of the things I've been criticized the most for. And guilty as charged. Here's what happened. I walked into office January 9th last year. First question I asked, how much money are we annually sending over to Ann Arbor as a subsidy? I received 3 numbers. And I don't say that as an attack on anyone. I think it just shows that we were not in a position of asking those questions, asking them that way. So part of my work over time has been to, can we do a deep dive into the accounting and understand that differently? Eventually brought in someone I've worked with who does financial analysis at universities to do a report and to help us understand some things. His group, which I think has been maligned in some of the social media, and it's unfortunate. That firm has worked with almost 200 colleges and universities across the country. Jeff and his team this was the 4th report I've been part of with Jeff. He's one of the smartest financial higher ed people I know. He cares deeply about Christian higher education. He's not coming in wanting to undermine what we do. It's much more the question of how do we build something that is sustainable over time to live out mission. So Jeff and his team did exactly what I wanted and needed. Help me understand what's working and not working financially at the Ann Arbor campus. And what really came out of that analysis, one of the most salient points, several pieces. There were metrics to help us understand how we should be living out our work. And we may never hit those metrics perfectly, right? And that's okay, but we need those targets to know how close or far away from health we are. So one of the metrics, for example, was we should not be spending more than 70% of our tuition net revenue on people costs across the university. Well, essentially, at Ann Arbor, it's about 100%, and at Wisconsin, it was at 90%. So, again, I'm a Shakespeare guy, not a math major, but those numbers don't all align, and we need to do some work there. And I don't say that as attacking people, but I'm saying that we had some wise people helping us with metrics, saying, we're out of whack, and we need to work on these things. And once I knew that, I'll jump into it in a second, I want to just get to that speed question. That information was pretty important. We were far away from some health metrics. Secondly, once we knew from Jeff's report that the auxiliary numbers, the auxiliary revenue was never going to support us as an institution the way we needed to on the Ann Arbor campus, I knew we needed to act quickly. There's no point in waiting. There's no point in continuing to live out deficits year after year. It's time to act. And that's what I brought to the Regents. And I understand that brought incredible drama and shock and horror and all of that. I understand the emotions. But we had waited too long. And there was no point in waiting longer. We knew what we knew. And there is no joy in talking about these kinds of adjustments and changes. I take no pleasure in that. I taught at Ann Arbor for 5 years, more than 5 years. I have a deep, abiding love for the place. Poor Pastor Baker was my student, and those were great years. Those were wonderful years for me. And I'm the last person. I am not excited in my own prayer life that the Lord has brought this to my leadership moment, and it needs to be done. So, it was, let's go. We need to act.
Well, if not now, when?
Yes, we could wait. I mean, yes, when I hear this, wait for the church, there is no rescue. There is no rescue. I know enough to know from conversations across the synod, there is no synodical money coming to us. There's no one on a white horse bringing large buckets of money. So here we go. It's our challenge to solve, and we are prepared to do it, and we are able to do it, and I want us to do it in a way that is completely ethical and aligned with who we are as Christians, but that doesn't mean we should not act. So, question?
Just clarification.
Yes.
When you said 90% of Met 1 and 100% of Ann Arbor's money was going to people costs, that means like 0 for maintenance and upkeep buildings?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that's all I wanted to know.
Yeah, so essentially if you take tuition net revenue, we were taking 100% of tuition net revenue at the Ann Arbor campus and putting it to people costs. So for every dollar we're making, we're spending it on people. And that should be 30% less.
Yeah.
And even at Wisconsin, it was high. So and again, we may never fully hit that 70%, but our efforts are let's figure out where we can we need to be a lot closer to that 70%.
And
Yes.
Before, when you said that the sports normally would be funded by what you bring in for housing,
Yes.
and then
Room and board.
Room and board, and then, so now what you're doing is the housing plus 25% of the tuition money, and that's where they're going.
And I tell you all of that in transparency. I think I've been accused of not being transparent. I'm trying to be transparent. This outside firm used our numbers.
Yes.
They didn't go in and cook the books. They sat down with our institutional research team and our CFO and went through the numbers we submit to the federal government, etc. So again, while our audits tell us great stories, audits are very different from operational costs. And how much is in the checking account regularly to address our bill pay? Yeah.
Just so nobody misheard anything here, because it took me a few times in the report to capture distinctions here. There are two separate metrics that we're looking at,
Yes.
which don't really, so one is your auxiliary revenues, room and board, should cover student life and athletics. That's just one thing. The last one, President Ankerberg's reference you're asking about, is net tuition revenue. That's where 100% of that is paying salaries in Ann Arbor, 90. It's not that 100% of all revenue is in Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
Right?
No, it's
Just
net
so
tuition.
we get
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Yeah. Joey, I'm sorry, I caught you mid-bite. That was not fair.
I've had a member here who's been here for a while, and he gets into the numbers as a gift of his. And he's been pointing out that the model between the two universities is not sustainable for probably 5 to 7 years.
I think
no one wanted to listen to him.
Well, I think it's one of the challenges, and I think people of goodwill have wanted this to work.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I've talked about it even with the executive team as a bit of what I'd call the sunk cost fallacy. The belief we have put so many resources into this. At some point, we've got to turn a corner and this has to work. We've got to get to a place where we can be in the black and have positive revenue. It's also, we've been operating broadly, and it's been in different podcasts, etc. We've been kind of managing by audit. If the audit's okay and the DOE score is okay, everything's fine. Well, one of the ways we knew we were having challenges is that our cash flow situation as a university is a lot different than it was 10 years ago. Is it a crisis? No. I need you to hear strength. But it's different enough that I would be irresponsible as president if I didn't say, we need to tackle this. If the markets were to go down suddenly, just the Dow hit 40,000 yesterday, pretty cool for a lot of people, right? Well, if it sinks precipitously and our advancement team is not able to bring in what they've been able to bring in, all of a sudden this is a very different conversation about vulnerability when we have an operational deficit of the size that we've had. So while things are great, it's great. it would be irresponsible if I didn't pursue this, and if my leadership team didn't, and if I didn't encourage the board to. So, all right.
There's a question over here.
Yes, please.
All right. I'm hearing, as I'm sitting here listening, I'm hearing perhaps a mosaic be constructed or an image being painted.
Yeah.
Basically, Mequon's in decent shape, Ann Arbor is in very bad shape, which some of us have been saying for some time. Yet, if it's 20% of operations, I mean, I think you can I think most people can fairly classify Ann Arbor as a failed acquisition. What in the corporate world we call a failed acquisition. At some point, you have to simply chop off the rotten meat and the rotted limb, if you will. Ann Arbor, frankly, is the financial iceberg that's dragging down the Mequon Titanic. To what you've had about $30 million in debt that's come due for renegotiation in the last 2 years at a significantly higher rate. Advantageous it may be, but higher than when it was initially negotiated. How much impact is that new budget, is that new financing impacting our students at Mequon?
You know, I'm not sure that is impacting them a great deal at this point. I think the biggest issue, and again, it's two different issues across two campuses. The primary issue harming us at Wisconsin has been staffing out of alignment with the number of students. So that is why we've carried out the reduction in force. Most of that work is done. We need to cut back programs now and do some curating of the programs across the university, but the questions at Ann Arbor are just different because of the complexity around the auxiliary revenue, the inability to generate revenue, the cost of sports. So we just have that different calculus, and we need to figure out how to construct a different model that essentially our hope is much closer to either being a zero loss or hopefully some sort of revenue gain. We're projecting for next year, Wisconsin will be in a different and better financial position. I really don't want to talk about those numbers because they're projections right now, and we don't know what the changes in Ann Arbor might do to the overall budget that are proposed. You know, all of that it's incredibly up in the air, so I'm not sure going forward that I can fully speak into that. But the challenges for finances at Wisconsin have been primarily tied to overstaffing.
Just a follow-up, and strictly for clarification, did I understand you to state earlier in so many words, naturally, that you did not see a pathway to financial viability at Ann Arbor?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think there is, but I think it needs to be a different model than what is existing now. I
mean as is now.
Yeah, I do not think we can continue, and I think this has been the argument from what I hear from friends in Michigan, that we need to find a way to just keep everything as is and generate more resources or whatever.
We're not the government, we can't print our own money.
Well, that's where I said I think the model is unsustainable. So, you know, the desire to wait, it's really about we need to construct something that works. So, we as an executive team have brought to the regions multiple models. We have different things that can be thought through in terms of ranges of commitments to athletics, ranges of numbers of students being served, ranges of numbers of academic programs. So that is all the homework a lot of smart people are chewing on over time here. So I think it needs to be different. And my encouragement to the board is that they're open to considering different models going forward. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, and some of us know, $90 million in deferred maintenance.
Well, no, it's $90 million we've spent over 10 years.
You mentioned $90 million being spent, but also another $90 million in deferred.
Oh, well, there is plenty of deferred maintenance. I would say it's new capital is probably at least mean, if we're going to talk about a new field house and dorm renovation, it's tens of millions of dollars. So, but I want to be careful with that. I don't think I was, if I did say 90 million in deferred maintenance, I misspoke. I don't think that's, it's not that much, but we have a field house that's end of life, that's probably 40 million, you know, by itself.
Oh, you said that to build the dorms, I think it was.
Oh,
To build the dorms.
Yeah, to build new dorms, that would probably be at least 100 million-ish. I mean, we're talking in broad numbers, the architects give me numbers, and, you know, it depends how nice the dorms are, right? You know.
Sure. 100 million here and 100 million there.
Well,
pretty soon you're talking real money.
Yeah. Yes, I am. Yeah, it does become monopoly money at some point, right? So I just want to give you a chance to. Anything you want to add to that?
No, not right off the top.
Okay. All right. Next steps on this. I hope you have a sense of how we got here and what the size of the challenges are and why there's conflict across two districts and two parts of the church about how to move forward. And I want to be fair to people in Michigan in terms of my representing their desires. And I also want to be very fair about my priorities as president for the university. We did, as a board of regents, in my working with them, decide that we wanted to announce to the church there were significant challenges. You know, as the PR gets criticized, I will own some of that. You know, the first communication was strong, probably a little more harsh than it needed to be, but at the same time, when I align what I said in that first video with the actions we've taken across the university, they do kind of correspond with one another. You know, it's not been a nice, pretty, easy thing for us to live out. Some institutions don't go public, or they just make a video and say we're not opening. We're done. And I think there are pros and cons to how you communicate in those moments, right? You can come out and say, we've made these decisions and we're going to live them up. And here we go. You can also come out and say, we have a significant problem, we're going to be working through the problem. And we're going to try to find ways to do that the right way. The Board of Regents opted for that latter option. And there is a virtue to that, of trying to be transparent and communicate and give opportunity. But the downside of that is it also allows space for an awful lot of angry pushback, which we've experienced. So I just say that so that you understand there aren't easy choices there. And there could have been other ways we communicated. We could have just said, well, we've decided to do X with this campus, and here we go. And the board made a prudent decision, and we've tried to live that out faithfully. And I keep asking for opportunities for compromise around the future. And in that space, my executive team is committed to bringing options to the Board of Regents that allow us to be physically present in Michigan, to do our best work with our best programs, but to do that in a way that is financially responsible and sustainable over time. And that includes church work programs. So others have also asked, as part of the PR question, you know, have you gone to different entities in the church? Yeah, yes. There have been discussions with the members of the Board of Directors of Synod, with the Synodical President, with the CFO of Synod, with other Concordia presidents. This has not been some sort of closed-off, isolated conversation in which, frankly, I don't want anyone to think I'm cackling in my office as I do plan harm. It's not that kind of thing at all. It's quite different. It's how can I connect with people and ask hard questions and also ask accountability questions. I ask in those meetings, are we misstepping? Is there something we're missing? Is there another option we can pursue? And the answer, answers are not forthcoming always. Anything that is possible, we're turning over those stones and asking both how we can partner and are we missing things. So I don't want to claim we're the smartest people in the room, I am surrounded by very smart people, but we're trying to go intentionally, carefully, wisely with consulting with experts across the church body, outside the church body. And that includes presidents I know outside our system, asking for their advice, showing them things, etc. I showed the report we received from the outside financial report to at least 3 presidents outside the CUS. Said, am I misreading it? The answer was no. Some of this is culturally, it's very hard for this university, which is used to great success. The Lord has blessed this place over time in just incredible ways. When you think about the move to Mequon, enrollment growth, financial success, when I can say to you 10 years ago we were 8 to 10 million in the black, that is a world that's amazing. And it's not the world the Lord's given us today. So those are things we have to consider in this as well. So the Board of Regents has set up a task force, perhaps you've heard about this, that is exploring. Broadly, its task is to address the possibility of reinstating Ann Arbor as an autonomous CUS campus. Is that a possibility? That seemed to be a very attractive option to the people in Michigan. And I would also say it's fair to say there's been some challenges around this or contentiousness about this, but the task force is also quietly, because there's a lot of smart people on it, they have been invited to say, hey, are there other things we should be considering? Nesting that into the report. So the report's coming back to the Board of Regents soon. There are draft reports that have already been prepared, and there are essentially 4 areas of consideration. Mission: to what extent can the Ann Arbor campus meet those new Lutheran identity standards that Synod has set up in its bylaws? So CUS has been involved and carried out an informal visit of the campus. Aaron is part of that. Thank you for being part of that conversation. There is a finance subcommittee that includes both local as well as national figures in the church who are very wise and know a lot more about money than I do, and I'm very grateful for their leadership in being involved in assessing the finances and the potential for independence. A group that's looked at the accreditation issues, whether that's the Department of Education, Higher Learning Commission, etc. And then a group that's looking at the property and legal issues. What are the things we don't know about? How valuable is the property? Is that a resource? To what extent are we vulnerable to the laws of the state of Michigan if we make changes, etc. So just exploring and making sure it's really the group of don't let us make any mistakes as we talk about these things. And the 4 draft reports are coming together, and they will be essentially compiled into one report that is published. As I understand it, it will be published after the board makes a decision. It will be given to the board privately for review before the June 6th meeting. It will be published out by the Board of Regents after that meeting as an explanation of what it's doing or not doing. So those are the things that are coming up. Yes?
When you say published out, what does that mean?
That means probably digitally put up on the university's web portal.
So it'll be public?
It will be a public document, yes. That's what I've been told. So June 6th, we'll be having that board meeting. So an important day for the university. So we're in process on that. I'd say the reports tell us a lot of things we know. There's many good things there, and there are sizable challenges. That's a fair way of putting it, and I'm grateful that so many wise people from Michigan District, from across the Synod, from the Board of Regents are collaborating to do the best work that they can. It's an amazing, generous group of people, and we're trying to keep it, who's on that group, quiet at this point, because I don't want their inboxes filled with angry emails about what they ought to do. So it's not hiding, it's not trying to pull a fast one. It's that tempers are a little high, and I want those people to be able to quietly do their best work. But it does involve regents, leaders from across Synod. It involves people from Michigan. So there's an effort to have a lot of people double check the homework, and see if what we're thinking about works or doesn't work. Questions about that? All right. See, I am going longer than I intended. Here we go.
And you
Last
said-
slide. Elevator pitch and my asks, and then we can move on. I love this quote from T.S. Eliot, the American and British poet. This is from his book, The Use of Poetry and the Use of Criticism. To do the useful thing, to say the courageous thing, to contemplate the beautiful thing, that is enough for one man's life. As a recovering English professor, I love what Eliot says there, and I think it's a fabulous model for us to think about what we do in Lutheran higher education. And I don't mean by that word useful that it's a low use, it's a high use. This is all about the best ideals about our understanding of vocation. Lutheran higher education is a place in which students find ways to do extraordinarily useful things through their vocations. And some of that's about jobs, but it's about so many more things, in family and community and culture and the world. And it is a Christian thing. It is a service thing. It is a sharing of the gospel, sharing out, pouring out God's love and forgiveness that they've received in the divine service out into the lives of the people that the Lord brings to them. That's the highest kind of usefulness that I think our students bring as they leave our place. And if you don't know many of our students or you're unsure of our work, meet them. They're extraordinary. We brought some students in to meet with the regents 2 weeks ago at their meeting and have lunch. One of them, name's Maddie. She's a basketball player. She's captain of the women's basketball team. She's in our Business Scholars Program, which is a 5-year program. Actually, it's a 4-year program where a student graduates with an MBA. She has started her own business as a kind of digital marketer. And she's an extraordinary student, strong Christian, great human being. As I was sitting at lunch with her, I said, good for you that you have just milked everything out of this university that it has to offer. And she's an example of us at our best. A student that's had this comprehensive, deep experience rooted in the Christian faith that also leads her to whatever the Lord has in store for her. And I think it's some pretty exciting things. To say the courageous thing. Our students are well prepared to go out and say hard things in a world that needs to hear some hard things. And whether that's about the confession of our faith and speaking into the person and work of Jesus Christ, or it's about values, or it's about the culture, or whatever, our students are prepared to think about and to go out and change what they discover in the world, and hopefully be these agents for good. And that's not in a mean way. I mean, I think, again, if you meet our students, they're not trying to be provocative or aggressive for the sake of that. It is about being winsome. It's about having, and I like that word, the courage to say hard things and to live a life that's faithful to what the gospel asks of us. And that's also a wonderful thing that's unique about our university. And then to contemplate the beautiful thing. And, you know, as an English professor, I can go to aesthetics, I can go to art, I can go to all of those things. But I also think that's about the core of the Christian faith. The Trinity is a beautiful thing. The work of the Trinity is a beautiful thing. And as that's lived out creedally, and as we expose our students to that, that's more than just pretty pictures or nice books. It is about their deeply engaging a world that our Lord has created and lives in and invites us to live with Him and prepares us to live with Him at home. And that beauty is something that, again, I think our students have access to in ways that other institutions don't provide. So those are the things that I'm committed to our chasing, pursuing, and doing our best work around. So briefly ask for things, always pray for us, right? Whether that's in the divine service or in your private devotions, or you're just driving past campus, lift up a quick prayer that the Lord would continue to encourage and help us to be faithful, as well as to do great work with our students. And I'm so grateful for that. That is the best thing you can do for us. Second thing, tell our story. You know, we're going to make mistakes, we're going to screw up sometimes. And we're going to do some great work too. When you hear complaints, send them to me. So we've had a habit of people going to our regents and calling them and saying, have you seen what that's going on there? The world is falling apart at Concordia. It's not falling apart, but we're making mistakes. Chase us when we do that. Chase my office. I'm glad to entertain those things. We work on fixing them when we hear about it. We had the questions about the Holly, for example. That was a mistake in terms of how we talked about it. And it was simply, it was an effort, a good faith effort for people to try and connect international students with our traditional students. It was cricket and food. And we shouldn't have used that language, and we shouldn't have made it look like we were doing more than we were doing. We were not trying to compromise our confession of faith. The consequences of that, or the results of that, a lot of hard conversations internally. Very grateful for Aaron to be collaborating with the district, as well as our international office across both campuses to develop a new policy around how we engage international celebrations. That's the language we want to use. We will be doing those things differently. So hopefully when we make mistakes, we learn, and we hopefully do things better. But I want you to be assured we've listened to those things and we care about it. There was another incident around Ramadan. We discovered, I didn't know this, we have about 500 social media accounts for the university that are not centrally controlled. Okay, so now I have something else to wake up at 3 a.m. Let's just say going forward, we will not have 500 social media accounts that are essentially uncontrolled. It's an invitation for us to realize how something has gotten away from us, and that it's everything from an alumni group from 1995 that has their own Facebook page to, so, I will own it shouldn't have happened, and it will be handled differently going forward. So, appreciate your patience with that. But when you hear things that aren't going right, I'm not asking you to necessarily cover for us, but if you can also say, I know there's a lot of good people there trying to do good things. And when we need to hear that we've misstepped, we're going to hear that. And when others speak ill of us, if you can encourage them to live in the 8th commandment and to find out the straight story and to give us a chance to do right, I'm grateful for that. We're grateful for that. And if you can sometimes say, hey, there is some great stuff going on there. I heard about this Maddie, this student is going on. She's pretty cool. Send us your students, especially church work students. We care about that deeply, and our desire, even in any casual conversation, as you're hearing about young people or adults returning to school or people looking for a graduate degree, as people are just talking about different educational possibilities from soup to nuts, we are here to serve you. We are your university. And we are eager to be that resource for you. So whenever we have an opportunity to serve, we're grateful for that. And then finally, sharing your resources as you're able. That can be about money, but it can also be about time. If someone approaches you and asks you to serve on an advisory council for a different group in the university, etc., there are different ways to help, and a lot of ways to help. So I appreciate that. And with that, I really did kill 2 hours. Wow. Okay.
And you said you didn't have 2 hours.
I didn't have 2 hours to stop. Ask my kids when I tell them.
You're right.
Okay, that's true too. All right. So thank you for your time today.